Thank you, guys. Welcome to the online crowd. Glad you're with us tonight. Got some fun stuff going on. First of all, I wanted to mention we've got a number of guests. In fact, we have more guests than regulars tonight. I guess maybe not, but pretty close. We're really glad you guys are here. Just be at home, be comfortable, and if you have any questions, ask. But we're really, these Friday nights are really just about us gathering and, loving Jesus, loving each other, and having some fun, getting into God's Word and just having a good time with it. So as we get started, though, I wanted to mention on the back table, you will see some sheets called Data. What is it, Chris? Data of the Cross? Data? Yeah. So last week, of course, was Easter, right? And Friday night last week, we did a big to-do, had a full meal, and had a good time. And that's why the cross parts are set up in the entry as you came in. The idea there was you could actually pick that up and feel the weight. Sandra did a lot of research, and a lot of it's on that sheet back there. But, the weight of just some of we talk about the cross, but what does that mean? So that's there. So you could even actually take those ropes and pick that piece up if you want, that cross piece, and just feel it and experience it. Feel what was it that Jesus carried? Because they say he carried that cross piece, not the upright. But anyway, that's why that's out there still. And I wanted to leave it one more week just so people could experience that if you didn't last week. So feel free to grab one of those information sheets just there on the back. And then if you want to interact with those timbers, you're welcome to do so. So that's why those are there. And then we don't have any special events coming up yet to announce, but we will have some special events coming up. We'd like to do one a month, do a variety of different things. So now that we're into spring, we'll find some fun things to do. And I really should get a hike. Anybody want to go on a hike this summer? Yeah? Okay. We'll try to get a hike on the summer schedule. So, because that's part of it, right? Getting together on Friday nights, but also hanging out and having some fun together and so forth. So without any further ado, we have TJ teaching tonight. Now, some of you know TJ, partly because he's here every Friday night, right? He's taught here a few times. This is your third, I think, time? He has some great insight on how to study the Word of God. And obviously, that's key to any Christian's growth, right? Is understanding God's Word and just being on a constant journey of learning and developing. And it's really hard to do that. I mean, yes, you can ask ChatGPT and it'll give you lots of good answers. It's a great way to study anymore, actually. But to get into the Word yourself and have the tools and wherewithal to learn and grow and shape your belief system and so forth is important. So TJ will be teaching us along those lines tonight, but I wanted to mention this book is actually on Amazon as well, so you can go to Amazon and find this, but it's back here on the back table, $10. You can either give that right to TJ or you can give it to Open Fields and we'll get it to him. But I knew he would not really promote this tonight. So I decided to do it for him. So Practical Guide to Studying the Bible, TJ Friend. So Google it. Those of you watching online, I know you can find it on Amazon. Maybe you can find it other places too. Don't tell him if you find it in places where there are used books. You wouldn't mind, would you? Anyway, very good book. If you're here, you can find it on the back table, but don't hesitate to order it on Amazon as well. So, TJ, I am going to turn it over to you. Please come and you'll be a blessing. Thank you for giving tonight. Stay seated. Because we have so many guests, Sandra at the piano is my wife. I'm Seth. And we decided to do this thing called Open Fields Church. We're here every Friday night. And normally it's Sandra or I teaching. We kind of share that responsibility. So we have a lot of fun with it. And anyway, we welcome you back any Friday night that you would like to be here, because we are here every Friday night. So with that, TJ, have fun. Are you using this mic? Yes. Okay. There you go.
Hello. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
Great. I would like to start off by just thanking you all for being here. I'm glad you're here. Glad you guys are watching. I don't know if it's been a busy week or a busy day. It was a busy day for me, but I'm glad you made the time to come out and learn more about God, learn more about the Bible, enter into some community, and just have fun. So I would like to talk about a passage in the Old Testament, 1 Kings 11 and 12. Before we get there, I have a few things to talk about first, but just let you know where we're going. On that note, at any time, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. We're going to go into some slightly more difficult passages of Scripture. So I want to make sure that you all understand the passage that we're going through. So do not hesitate to ask, because that's what I want. I want us all to understand this passage. So I have basically 4 goals tonight. The first goal is that we would read the Old Testament. I think the Old Testament is underread and underappreciated, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I'm hoping that as we dive into this Old Testament passage, that you'll see there's some good stuff in there. It'll encourage you, maybe get you excited, or at least curious about the Old Testament and get more into it. Second, I would like to give you some strategies, some tips, some questions, some ways to look at the Old Testament so you can understand it. Because I don't want you just to read the Old Testament, I actually want you to understand it. And on that note, the Bible is not just for pastors, teachers, people who have gone to Bible college, seminary. It's actually for everyone. God wants to speak to each person, and that's why he's given us his word. So as you're reading, I would encourage you to pray and ask God to have him speak to you. And I would like you to have at least some confidence that God can speak to you and that you can get some things out of the Old Testament. So that's part of my goal here tonight, is at least for the Old Testament to give you a little bit more of that confidence in studying the Word. Third, this passage in 1 Kings, I think, is one of the most important passages in the Old Testament for understanding one of the pieces of Israel's history that is not really talked about. And if you understand it, it will greatly help you in understanding other parts of the Old Testament, specifically Kings and Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So, as I said before, I want to make sure we really understand this passage because it's important for understanding other parts of the Old Testament. And fourth, finally, and probably most importantly, is application. I want us to actually learn some things, grow closer to God, and have him speak something to us, because otherwise we're just here hearing stories and having fun or whatever, but if we're not drawing close to God, then we're just missing the point. So before we actually get to the 1 Kings passage, I would like to talk about that second goal here a little bit more and talk about genre. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term. It's used popularly in talking about different things like movies and books. You can see in movies you have different genres. You have like comedy, romance, thriller, those type of things. In books you have similar things. There's like sci-fi, fantasy, documentaries, those type of things. It's just a different style. Genre is just another word for style. The Bible is written 66 books over many thousands of years, and there are multiple genres in the Bible. It's not just one book with one genre. Some of the genres are like poetry, so if you read Psalms, or Proverbs, that Proverbs is its own genre. You get prophecy if you get to like Isaiah, Jeremiah. When you get to the New Testament, you get like Gospels and epistles. There's Revelation, which is its own genre. And then there's the one we're going to be talking about, which is narrative, also known as story. You can say the whole Bible is one story because it has one plot that goes from beginning to end. But there's those little pieces that are in there that are not necessarily stories. Like a psalm isn't a story, but it's part of the bigger story. So when we're talking about narrative or we're talking about story, we're talking about three things. We're talking about character, we're talking about setting, and we're talking about plot. So when you get to a story aspect of the Bible, so like Noah, Jonah, there's other stories. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all those people, the Exodus, all those stories. You want to see how it fits into the bigger story of the Bible, but also just on an individual level, when you're reading the individual stories, you want to look for these three things. You want to look for the characters, you want to look for the setting, and you want to look for the plot. So when we look for character, what I mean by that is obviously who are the characters, but more importantly, what specifically does it say in the text about those people? What job do they have? What do they look like? Any other specific descriptors of the people and how the Bible describes them. There are a lot of other books, a lot of other stories, a lot of other texts that are not in the Bible. That's because the Bible, that's what God wanted to speak to us to have remain over time. So what is in the Bible is actually important for us. So when they make even small details, it's there for a reason. So try and look for some of those details, the small ones or the big ones, to help you understand these stories. Setting, that is basically just where these things are taking place. The more you understand where it's taking place, it can help you to understand the story a little bit better. Things like, I was thinking about Jonah, if you guys are familiar with that story, where Jonah is told to go to Nineveh, and he sets off and he gets on a boat, and if you look at where he's going, it's in the opposite direction of Nineveh. But you can only see that if you're looking at the setting and the places. So on that note, I would recommend getting either a Bible dictionary, a Bible atlas, or just whenever a place comes up, Googling it, seeing where it's at, what it looks like, try and get a feel for where the different cities and different places are. It'll greatly help you out when you are specifically looking at Old Testament stories. And then the big one is plot, just what the people are actually doing and how it all fits together. So let's look at an example passage which will actually give us a little bit of a background to the 1 Kings passage. This is kind of long, but as we read through it, I want you to specifically think about those first two, character and setting. The plot is a little bit more self-explanatory, but as we read this, look for the specific things that the Bible is telling us about the people and any places and anything it might say about them. So we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 22. I'm just going to read it through, and I will stop as we need to. Just want to make sure you guys can see that. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. Okay, we'll just stop here just to see what I'm talking about. So just on that first sentence, can you guys see anything on the character front? What is it saying about Samuel, or what's it saying about his sons? Anyone?
He was old.
Saying he's old, okay. You can infer that he has the ability or the authority to appoint people. So you can just see those two things, even just from that one verse. You can also infer that Israel has leaders. So, okay, let's move on here. The name of his firstborn was Joel. The name of his second was Abijah. And they served at Beersheba. So we don't necessarily need to look at Beersheba, but if you wanted to, you could see where it's at. Their names, I mean, you can see later in Samuel what happens to his two sons. But let's just keep moving here. His sons did not follow his ways. Okay? Pretty clear right there. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So as you can see, it gives a specific description of what they're like. They're disobedient, they're going for bribes, and they're just not following God. So all the elders of Israel, there we know, Israel has elders, gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. You could also look up that place if you want and see where it is in relationship to Beersheba. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord. Okay, let's go back here real quick. Getting to the plot, we can see they are asking for a king to be like the other nations. Right now, it doesn't say this specifically in the text, but if you read earlier in Samuel, you can see Samuel was the leader, and they're asking for a different leader. They actually want a king, and as you can see in verse 5, appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. So it's also part of their reason why, not just that they want a king, they want it to be like the other nations. Okay, let's move forward here. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons, make them serve with his chariots and horses. They will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all of the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." Okay, does everyone understand what just happened in that story? Just want to make sure, because this is a key background to where we're going. I'll just recap it here for you. The Israelites came to Samuel. They said, "You're getting old. We want a king over ourselves." Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord told him to tell the Israelites what would happen to them if they got a king. There was a whole list of negative things that was going to happen. They'd be slaves. They'd have to give up their property. They'd be like leading his chariots. They wouldn't have their own autonomy. They'd have to do whatever the king said. So even with all that, the people said, "Sounds great. Let's do it." I'm just amazed by this story because they had a really good situation, and then they just decided to give it up. So let's just take a minute and think through this story and see if there's any application that we can make to our own lives. So I'll just offer this up to anybody. What is like a message that this passage might be trying to teach to us?
Are you saying we should overthrow Trump? It sounds oddly enough like today's age, though. No. Do they need a king?
I don't know what to say to that. No, I'm just asking, does anyone see any application points out of this story?
One thing that I see is just kind of like their jealousy of like other nations, kind of want to be like, because like Israel's kind of a small country here. There's lots of bigger nations around. It's just kind of like, oh, maybe if we had a king, that would fill the void, or a void, or scratch an itch, or whatever. And even with this prophecy where it's like, do you really want a king? This is how king acts. There's taxes, and military service, and all of it. And, yeah. So I think there's like a lot of jealousy going on, and that kind of probably is rooted in not trusting God.
Yeah.
Which I suppose that jealousy fed them being willing to give up their good situation too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because everything,
At least
part of it, like a cost essentially. And a lot of times when you buy something, you're okay with the cost, but then there's buyer's remorse and stuff. So, yeah, I kind of see that as.
So let's run with that a little bit. I think that is the key message of this passage. Trying to be like other nations, or in our situation, trying to be like other people. Trying to be specifically like people outside the church. This is something that I appreciate about Open Field Church, is that you guys are not trying to be like other churches. You're not trying to do what everybody else is doing. You're just like, we're going to do what we feel called to do. And then just with everyone here, this is obviously a Friday night. A lot of people go out partying, hanging out with their friends, doing whatever, watching a movie. But you have chosen to be here, which is awesome. But not very many people would do that. It seems kind of weird, seems kind of different. So I'm grateful for you guys being here. See how that application can fit in there? Okay, let's jump into 1 Kings. I'm going to try to go through 2 chapters here. 1 Kings 11 and 1 Kings 12. Like I said before, there's a lot in here. I'm hoping you can understand it all, and we'll get to the importance of this passage and how it plays into other things. And then at the end, we'll dive back into some application. Now, I'm going to go over 4 main sections in this. I'm going to cut out a little bit just to save some time, but I don't want you to think like I'm cutting out important information, so I'll just recap the sections that we skim over. Okay, so let's start off with 1 Kings 11, 1 through 13. Same thing. I want you to think about the people, how it describes them, and the specific places that are named. And as we're going through, just get a feel for what is going on in this story, from the beginning of 1 Kings 11 all the way to the end of 1 Kings 12. Okay. You guys ready? Let's go. 1 Kings 11:1. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. We'll stop there for a minute. What do we learn from this first verse about King Solomon? Yeah.
The Amplified version says King Solomon defiantly loved many foreign.
It's a good word.
I think the fact that it's not just women, foreign women, that means something. Like, it's like any woman, wherever, like, which.
Never satisfied.
Yeah, which in this day and age, fine, you can love an Asian, you can love a Mexican, you can love an American, whatever, like, it's fine. But for them, that was a problem because of the way culture was in that time frame. So, I think that's interesting, and I also think it's interesting, oh, there was something else I thought. I don't know, go ahead.
Okay. This may be obvious, but the first two words there, King Solomon, he's not just a person, he's the king over Israel, which you can see earlier in Kings. Just for some background, 1 Kings 10 talks about how awesome his kingdom is, how rich he is, how much money he has, how many houses and how much awesome stuff he has. It even talks about the Queen of Sheba who comes from a foreign land just to tell him how awesome he is and bring him a bunch of gifts. And then it goes immediately into this, which I think is interesting. These are some of the nations that Joshua or the people were kicking out of the of Israel, but they're still there. And as we'll see, they're worshiping other gods. So let's just move on. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. I want to make one other point on back to verse 1. I was reading through earlier in 1 Kings, which I would recommend everyone here to do. It gives some good background on it. I think we're going to get to this passage later, but Solomon built the temple, and he also built a bunch of houses. He built cities. He built specifically a house for himself, and then he built the same size house that he built for himself for, which I would say is his favorite wife, the Pharaoh's daughter. It is mentioned in verse 1. She has a whole giant house just for herself. Anyway, I just think it's interesting that he picked one favorite one. Okay. Verse 3. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. Okay, there's a lot in there. 700 wives is a lot, obviously. But even if it was just one, it would still be bad because it's not necessarily the number that this passage is going against. It's their foreign heritage, ancestry, and the fact that they're worshiping other gods. Okay.
What version is that?
This is NIV.
Okay.
The new NIV.
Okay.
As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Now, this is, I think, the key verse in this section. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but Solomon was the one who prayed, or God came to him and asked him, what do you want me to give you? Do you want riches? Do you want status? And he said, I just want wisdom. And God gave him wisdom and status and riches. This is before. I think it's around chapter 5.
It wasn't kicking in. But he lost it. At some point, he lost it. Yes.
And I know we'll get to application later, but just for now, even the wisest person can get led astray by letting their heart.
It's like he knew he was doing it, intentionally kept doing it, and going against what he was told,
Yep.
what he knew was better. I think we've all been there. I know I have.
Okay, let's move on to 5. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. He did the same for all his foreign wives. And as you guys recall, he had 700 wives. That's just crazy to me. That's a lot of altars. Who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe for the sake of David, my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. So just a little background, which this might be obvious, but with kingdoms, so we have the first king was Saul, then we had David, and Solomon is David's son. So there's a line of succession there, and God promised to David that his kingdom would last and he would always have somebody on the throne, and it would just be a eternal succession. So here he's telling Solomon that he's picking a subordinate, verse 11 where it says subordinate, so somebody who's not any royal heritage is going to become the king. That's what he's saying here. Okay, so this is the first section. Do you feel like you have a good grasp of what's going on here? Okay. Let's move on to let's move on to the next section, which will be 1 Kings 11:26 through 40. This section, so I'll just read it. Also, Jeroboam, I skipped over a little section here. So in between what I just finished and verse 26, there was 2 people, Hadad and Rezon, R-E-Z-O-N, that came and basically attacked Israel. They didn't destroy the kingdom or anything. They were just attacking Israel. So there's those 2 people, and now we're getting to Jeroboam, who... Well, I'll just read. Also, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, rebelled against the king. So when it says also, he's just referring to those other 2 people that were rebelling against the king. And now we have Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who rebelled against the king. So, he was one of Solomon's officials, an Ephraimite from Zereda, and his mother was a widow named Zeruiah. What's interesting about this is... Well, before we get into that, what can you guys see about Jeroboam in this passage?
He's the son of Nebat?
Yep.
He was rebelling against Solomon,
Yep.
and was an official of Solomon.
Exactly. And what do we know about Zeruiah?
She's a widow.
She had no husband anymore.
So, sorry, Nabat, you're gone. Yeah, so he was raised by Zeruiah, single mom. Here is the account of how he rebelled against the king. Solomon had built the terraces and had filled in the gap in the wall of the city of David his father. Now Jeroboam was a man of standing, and when Solomon saw how well the young man did his work, he put him in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. Let's go back here real quick. There's a couple interesting things here. Starting in 28, we see that Jeroboam was elevated to the position of overseer or just being in charge of the whole labor force of the tribes of Joseph. And it's not super clear on verse 27, this why he rebelled, but I think it's because of this reason that he was in charge of the labor force and he saw how they were being treated, and I think that was part of why he rebelled, is he didn't like the way they were being treated. That's just my own interpretation. But one thing I did notice in here, which is interesting, which will make more sense as we get later on into the story, the Solomon, he took Jeroboam and elevated him because he saw how well the young man did his work. So there's a positive there, but there's also a negative. The positive, obviously, is if you're good at your work, just like Joseph, he got elevated because of how good he did his work. I'm talking about Joseph from the Old Testament. But Jeroboam, we'll get to this later, but he had some negative traits as well, which I don't know if Solomon noticed or not, but he definitely didn't take those into account when he elevated him. So it's just a lesson if you are elevating people. Don't just look at how good they are at their job, but also look at their heart and their character and see if they're moral, ethical people.
The ESV version says that he was put in charge of I'll read it exactly. It says, so he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph, which, that's interesting. Forced labor, that sounds like slaves.
Yes.
I don't know that makes difference, it's just interesting.
It definitely was slaves, and it's slaves not from the people of Israel, but from the other tribes surrounding. Okay. Well, let's move on. About that time, Jeroboam was going out of Jerusalem, and Ahijah, the prophet of Shiloh, met him on the way. So now we have a new character, Ahijah, who is a prophet, wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone out in the country, and Ahijah took hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have one tribe. I will do this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the god of Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws, as David, Solomon's father, did. So, just real quick, so you understand how what he's doing here. Israel is a nation, but it's divided into 12 parts. Yes, one for each tribe. And without getting too much into the history, each tribe is based on a son of Jacob, who later changed his name to Israel. So each son has his own tribe, which is the family that grew out of that son. And they each have their own little section of Israel. So what he's saying here, he took his cloak, he ripped it into 12 pieces, he gave Jeroboam 10 of them, and left the other 2, basically saying, you're going to get 10, and then there's going to be 2 left over. I know it says 1, but it's supposed to be 2. So that's a whole other weird thing. I think it's just that it's Judah and Benjamin are the other 2, and Benjamin is so small that it's overlooked. It's just, yeah. We'll just leave it at that. Anyway, let's keep reading here. But I will not take the whole kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I have made him ruler all of David's life for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose and who obeyed my commandments and decrees. I will take the kingdom from his son's hands and give you 10 tribes. I'll give 1 tribe to his son, so that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to put my name. So as I said before, God made a promise to David that he would always have somebody ruling in Israel throughout time. So this is him fulfilling that promise. Even though Solomon messed up, he didn't take away all of Israel. He took away most of it. However, as for you, I will take you and you will rule over all that your heart desires. That's the interesting part right there, all that your heart desires. So obviously Jeroboam had some desire for advancement, and that was in his heart. If you do whatever I command and you walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes by obeying my decrees and commands as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David and will give Israel to you. This is another interesting promise because Jeroboam was just elevated to this position and he's about to be given the kingdom, not necessarily based on anything he did, just God's favor on his life. But God still gave him the same opportunity to have that same promise that he gave to David go on to Jeroboam and kind of graft him into that promise. But it wasn't automatic. As you can see, verse 38, if you do what I command and walk in obedience, then I will do this. Okay, let's move on. I will humble David's descendants because of this, but not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam fled to Egypt to Shishak the king and stayed there until Solomon's death. So after Jeroboam got this promise, Solomon somehow found out about it and tried to kill him. So Jeroboam fled down to Egypt and stayed there until Solomon's death. Do you guys have that map? Let's take a glance at this and just so you can get a... Wow, that's really small. Can you see that? Okay. So this was around Jerusalem. Has a star right there. And then Egypt is basically down here somewhere. So he went from there down there. I just want you to get a general view of what this looks like. We'll jump back into looking at this more later, but I think it's helpful just having a visual. You can see this is basically the whole kingdom of Israel, and there's all the other surrounding nations that are surround them, that Solomon took wives from all those different places. Okay, we're not going to read the next passage, but in the next passage, which is through the end of chapter 11, Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam is made king over Israel. So, yeah, we got Jeroboam and Rehoboam. I know they're very similar, so I'm hoping you can keep track of the different names. Rehoboam is Solomon's son, who is elevated, and Jeroboam is the one who got the promise and who was the official who is going to reign as well. So let's go on to chapter 12 now. Okay. Rehoboam went to Shechem. You just took that down. Can you throw that back up again? Okay, so we were in Jerusalem. Can you see Shechem on there? It's right there. Yes. So he went up there to become... Okay, I just wanted you to look at that. Let's finish reading this now. Keep that visual in your mind. Okay, so Rehoboam, this is Solomon's son, the king, went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to make him king. When Jeroboam, remember Jeroboam, he's down in Egypt, the son of Nebat, heard this. Oh, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt, so they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days and then come back to me." So the people went away. So do you understand what's going on here? Rehoboam's going up to Shechem to become king. The people are going to go anoint him as king. And Jeroboam comes back from Egypt with the people, and they say, "Your father," that's Solomon, "put a heavy yoke on us. Can you lighten the load for us?" And Rehoboam says, "Go away for 3 days. I'm going to think about it, and then come back, and I'll give you my answer." So the people went away. Now let's see what happens in those 3 days. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father, Solomon, during his lifetime. "How would you advise me to answer these people?" he asked. They replied, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. Let's just take a moment there. These young men, they grew up with him and they were serving him. Just keep that in your mind. He asked them, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him replied, "These people have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter.' Now tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam. As the king had said, "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given to him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill the word the Lord has spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah the Shilahite. Is that it? Oh. When all of Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." So the Israelites went home, but as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. Let's just pause there just so we can recap of what is going on here. So Rehoboam took his 3 days. He thought about it. He asked the old advisors of Solomon, "What should I do?" Then he asked the younger advisors. The old advisors told him, "Lighten the load." And the newer, his friends that he grew up with, told him, "Make it even heavier." So he decided to go with the harsher treatment. He's like, "You thought it was bad under Solomon? It's going to be twice as bad under me." So Israel just left. They didn't anoint him king. and they just went home. Where are we at? 18. King Rehoboam sent out. Let me just finish this. King Rehoboam sent out Ninram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. When all the Israelites heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David. Okay, that is it. Let's pull up the map again so you can see what is going on here. So they were up in Shechem, and Rehoboam went there to get anointed as king. The people rejected him as king because of his harsh answer. So then he went back to Jerusalem. He sent out one of his officials. They stoned him to death and basically decided, we're not going to have anything to do with you. We're going to make Jeroboam our king, and you can just stay down there and be king of your area. So this is the part I was getting at on my third goal over there, which was just telling you an important part of Israel's history. This is the part of Israel's history where they split into two kingdoms. It used to be one, and then this happened, and now we have two. We have the 10 tribes up north with Samaria as the capital, led by Jeroboam. Then we have the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, down in the south with Jerusalem as their capital. This is super important information because as you read the rest of Kings or Chronicles or just wherever you're reading, it'll make reference to Israel or Judah. When it's talking about Israel in this context, it's not talking about all of Israel. It's only talking about the top half of Israel, which they call Israel. If it's talking about Judah, it's just talking about the southern part, which is just those 2 tribes. So this is what I really want you to understand, is this split, this divide between these 2 kingdoms. And whenever you're reading through Old Testament stuff, if you come across something that says either Israel or Judah, you can keep this in mind and think, oh, this is talking about either the north or the south. And then the rest of Kings is going to either follow Jeroboam and his line and his kids and that succession through the northern kingdom, or it's going to follow Rehoboam and his sons and his descendants through the kingdom of Judah. So if you don't understand that, you can get confused on where they're talking about and what's going on. Okay, let us move on to the next. Actually, I'll just recap the next section. So right after this, Rehoboam in the south, he gathers all of his people in the south in Judah, and he tries to go up and take back the kingdom. He creates this huge army, 180,000 people, and he's like, we're going to go take back the kingdom. But before he gets there, a prophet stops him and says, don't do it, this is from God. So they just go back home. Nothing too exciting over there. Okay. Are you guys following what has happened so far? I just want to go to this 4th section now, and we'll see what the kingdom under Jeroboam. Remember Jeroboam, he was leading the people. He's like, make this lighter, and then they made him king. So let's see how he does as the new king. Jeroboam fortified Shechem. Remember where Shechem was? That was up in the north, in the hill country of Ephraim, and lived there. From there, he went out and built up Peniel. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. That is back to Rehoboam's reign. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord. Rehoboam then they will give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." All right, let's keep going here. One he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan, and this thing became a sin. The people came to worship the one at Bethel and went as far as Dan to worship the other. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people. Even though they were not Levites, he instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and he offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made, and at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built up at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. Okay. Does anyone want to give maybe some kind of thoughts on, or not thoughts, just recap of what Jeroboam did?
He was scared to lose the kingdom.
Yes. Let's pull up the map again so you can see. So he is over there in the northern kingdom. See where Jerusalem's at? Mm-hmm. That used to be the capital of all of Israel. But it's still in the south. So Jerusalem was where the temple's at. That's where all the people had to go to offer their sacrifices and worship the Lord. Now, he said, I don't want you to go down to Jerusalem, because if you do that, you might go back down to Judah and I'll lose my position. So what he did, he built 2 calves, and he told the people, these are your gods. These are the people who delivered you from Egypt. And can we pull up that again? Because I want to see where he set those up. One was in Dan.
And the other one at Bethel.
And Bethel. Are those on there?
Bethel is.
Okay.
But
Bethel, that's Bet-El.
Yeah.
Dan is way up north. It's not on this map, but it's way up in the north. So that way they had 2 options. They could go down there or they could go up there. Let's pull back to the verse. I want you to see the specific things that he did here. So he built some shrines on high places. Look at verse 31. He appointed priests from all sorts of people. This, if you are not familiar with Old Testament history, you want to understand this, but this is actually a really big thing, because the Levites were the tribe out of the 12 tribes that were supposed to be the only ones who were allowed in the temple. They were like the religious leaders.
They were the priesthood, so
Yes,
all the priests came from the Levites.
exactly.
Yeah.
So he just picked random people and made them priests, which is in direct defilement of how God set things up. On top of that, he instituted a festival, and in verse 33, it says, on the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing. So he didn't make a holiday based on anything specific. He just picked a random day. We don't know what this holiday was about. Maybe it was just a holiday to himself or something. Can we go back to the previous passage? Verse like 25 through whatever. Yes. Verse 26. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. I think that's a key point right there. So let's just recap here. Make sure you understand the full story. So we started off with Solomon and his 700 wives. He ended up sacrificing and building all these altars to all these foreign gods because of the wives that he had married. Then he died. His son Rehoboam became king. Jeroboam was walking. He got the prophetic word from Ahijah that he was going to be king. Solomon got mad and chased him down to Egypt. Then Jeroboam, when he's about to get coronated or made king, he makes a bad decision, and all the people reject him as king and make... I meant Rehoboam. So Jeroboam is the one. I know, they're very similar names. So Jeroboam becomes king, and you can see how he ended up ruling. Does that all make sense? This is where the kingdom splits. This is an important thing. I'm hoping we can do this pretty quick, but let's just take a couple minutes. Can we split into 3 groups?
Sure.
Thank you. What I would like each group to do, I want one group to look at Solomon, I want one group to look at Rehoboam, and I want one group to look at Jeroboam. You can pull up on your phone and look at those, or I have some printouts that you can look at. What I would like you to do is find some...
Which one?
I don't care.
Which
Just
group has what?
whichever group wants whatever one is fine.
Sandra? I'm your group. I'm your group.
So just look at this and
We need
Jeremy can join.
try and find some application points, basically. What do you think God wants to say through this passage? Yeah. Everyone got it? Perfect. If you guys can't see on the screen, we have 1 Kings 11, 1 through 6 for Solomon, 1 Kings 12, 1 through 14 for Rehoboam, and 1 Kings 12, 26 through 30 for Jeroboam. We'll talk about it in a few minutes here.
TJ, what do you want from us again?
Just look at the passage. First off, try and understand what the passage is saying, so give like a small summary. And then second of all, what are some application points you can make? What is God speaking through this? What is the message of this text? What can you pull from it? Something along those lines. And sorry for the Rehoboam group. I gave you guys the biggest group section.
So, what else do we see?
Easily led astray by the wind.
The kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. I don't know if these people will go up to
Okay.
Maybe then worry about
Like a rock in a river.
After seeking advice, the kingdom two after, so it seems like people, there's too much for you to go.
And as you get older and the more inconsistent he's been with his decisions.
One he set up in Bethel, and this thing here.
So he followed,
Okay, the
so
worship,
he, does that mean he followed multiple gods at the same time?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
because his wife was probably
But almost like peel that.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Before I applied to the thing, so, yeah. These guys.
Oh, yes.
Brought you to Asia.
Well,
If he's, when he's with the Sidonians, you know,
Okay,
he's not got
yeah,
it.
made up a reason. They had already
On the map, all of those unhighlighted areas, that was all Israel. All the kingdoms, the tribes, well, that's the only, that's, okay, okay, okay.
They was supposed to.
Oh, that was when he's, I'm trying, and
And they came out of Dan and Bethel. God told them, this is Canaan that I want you to possess. They didn't do it because they got tired of fighting all the time. And they were like, "Oh, we've done enough." Okay.
So all of us tried to get out of it, all Egypt, countries around them, 40 days.
So the Sidonians and the Ammonites
Those
were
are-
out
Those up on the mountain for a while.
Okay, do we know if the wives were living with him or if he was traveling to visit them?
I think they were living with him.
They all thousands, all 300 courtesans, all lived with him? Okay.
Well, he built houses for them in that area.
Okay, okay.
And if you build the biggest one for his favorite,
I realize
she probably didn't want to share.
when they say it, so they take a step back and really try to kind of do the same thing around his friends. How easy
Here
the Israelites or Judeans, depending on which part of the kingdom you're talking about.
Yeah, but Hebrews were the 40 girls.
That's and somebody offers them up called the Catholic.
It's just kind of like basically God was hardening his heart to go about the way of separating the kingdoms because he did
Solomon was killed by they threw stones at him?
to Solomon that he was taking it away.
That's kind of like
His child.
Solomon was the
How'd
one.
Solomon die?
Yeah.
It doesn't say, he just said he died.
Oh, okay, old age.
He hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Okay.
How many times just to basically go about the way of king.
People did what was right.
And even though David did so, he was also
These kings
Say that.
no, but isn't that fascinating?
This is one of the ways where this is happening.
Pretty much all the
I think,
If you like to load the people with
denominations. So bad.
with the
It says it wasn't fully devoted.
Oh, that was Solomon.
Not David, I see, as David had been devoted. I see.
I think one thing we would see
There's something they like a lot, instead of realizing
is he never went after other.
the word is saying,
Yeah.
it's interesting because
this other part is garbage.
something where the elder should serve his father.
You know, it's like something you get the whole list of elders. They were older. Turns into a word to build it up.
I guess I don't know if they give
That's interesting.
Like now, I think it's all
That's
about
important.
And at this point, we don't
Because
have,
they
Goes
think
to
it's
prove
in
that people as a whole.
at this point in time, when this is happening, because the Bible is, yes, correct.
No.
So they didn't really, David didn't necessarily know that
You
he
can
was
take a look
doing
at
all the
politics today, it's the same way.
Yeah.
right? Or did they know enough
Yeah,
about
it's
God
hard
to the
to
point
sit there and
potentially?
think of that because
Yeah, I think
I'll just say they still have the Ten Commandments, and they had all the laws that
Okay, so they did,
No, okay.
Yeah.
They had the law, but they didn't have the prophets and all of that.
was.
They just had the, okay.
So they had a lot to be so defiant about it.
okay, okay.
They probably at that stage had the 630 rules, not only the 10.
yes, for sure, for sure.
Okay, I'll give you guys 30 more seconds.
We just thought of it.
What are we doing?
This is the kind of stuff that I was talking about before.
Blows me away.
To push and ask questions. Yes.
Jeroboam makes a comment
Yeah, that
that
was,
he's afraid for his life, so
it doesn't always go so
trying to
quick
appease the
because
people.
people see it as a challenge, not a requirement. You know what I
Hey, I'm
mean?
afraid you guys are gonna kill me. Oh, look, two golden calves.
Jeremy says that they tried to have the other person heard that it was.
That's why I trust her with this, because she has allowed me that to, yeah.
Okay, can we bring this back here? We just got a couple minutes left, so
Okay.
I just want to give us a chance. I want to hear what you guys got from this. So, who is the Solomon group?
We are.
Okay, can you summarize your passage and give us just one point of application?
Oops. What we saw from the passage is, Solomon, he desired to do what was right, but because of all the wives, he eventually got worn down to go towards what they believed instead of what his father taught him.
Which eventually God got worked out. God was
Yes.
very patient,
Yeah.
and then got to a point saying, no,
That's it.
enough.
Yeah.
Splitting you up, dude.
I like that. Okay, who had the Rehoboam group? Can you give me a summary and then just one point of application?
Okay, I can try. You look like a little bit leader.
basically, summary is that Rehoboam was, I'm going to guess he was probably a teenager and too full of himself, and decided that he thought he knew better than his father's wise advisors, and ignored their advice. And
Shoot, he can even be in his 20s, I think.
yeah,
No,
young guy,
he's
right?
definitely
Probably a young guy.
We're invincible at that age.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been even younger, you know, considering age and
that
stuff at
time,
that
yeah.
point, yeah.
So I think the takeaway is just like, don't ignore the advice of people older than you that have been through life,
Yeah.
have some experience.
I like that. Okay, Jeroboam.
Going back to that not taking good advice, Jeroboam being the one that the prophet had said, here's these 10 pieces. Either if you follow after God, he's going to bless you. If you don't, he's not. He, instead of listening to God, gives in or starts listening to his own voices, hearing that the people are afraid, or he gets afraid of the people, so he goes, oh look, a golden calf. Here, worship that instead of killing me. Even though God had told him, I'm going to take care of you if you go my way.
Would you mind reading just verse 26?
I can't say it, so.
It's the first one, isn't it?
Okay, Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David.
Thank you. I'll go in reverse order since you just read that. Jeroboam thought to himself. What I see there is that he wasn't asking for other input. He wasn't going anywhere else. He was looking inside of his own heart, his own desires, and just making a decision based on what he wanted to do. So I would say one application you can make from this is don't always just follow your own desires, because sometimes what you're trying to go for is, it has a false motive. And in his part, he was just trying to do it so he wouldn't lose the kingdom.
Yeah.
He had some bad motives, especially when God told him what he had to do.
I think what was wrong of him is he lived out of fear. He did everything out of fear. There was no space for God's love once he was consumed by that fear. So I think he made sinful mistakes in that fear, which I know I have and many times in my life too. So that's kind of what I see about the takeaway from that is he's making a lot of wrong decisions out of fear. There's no place for, there's no place for fear if you're fulfilled with God's love. So
It's interesting. I think both Jeroboam and Rehoboam just followed whatever they wanted to do, but Jeroboam did it out of fear, and Rehoboam did it out of arrogance.
Yeah.
Yes. And I would throw onto there,
use the discernment. Yeah, they would definitely go.
if you look at Solomon, what his folly was, he didn't necessarily make that decision consciously. At first, he got slowly drawn into it by all these wives that he had surrounded himself with.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to surround yourself with good people. Make sure you're not surrounded with people that are going to lead you astray, whether that be in marriage or close friends or whatever. Just make sure the people around you that you're listening to aren't pulling your heart away from God. Also with Rehoboam, he was listening to his friends, the people he grew up with.
Yeah.
And he got pulled similarly to Solomon into making bad decisions because he wanted to be cool or he just thought it was a good thing to do. And then as I pointed out with Jeroboam, he just had his own path that he was trying to go on. He had his own desires and he was trying to hold on to it so tightly that he missed what God was calling him to do. So I think all these stories are a good example of what to do or how not to make good decisions.
Right.
And then you can reverse that and say, okay, well, how do I make a good decision then?
I'd like to take it a step further in that Jeroboam, he built these golden calves for everybody. I find it so fascinating that the people are like, okay, and they just go do their thing. And I'm like, why are you not, like, these are people who grew up, knew God's instruction, knew, like, they should have known. So even for them, they make this decision based on whatever the leader says, we're just going to go do that thing. instead of questioning.
But
What
we
are we
still do
doing
that
here?
today.
We do,
Still so
absolutely.
much do that today.
Yeah, but it is fascinating, and I think it's another key in the whole thing of how not to make bad decisions.
Similarly with Solomon, he could have at any time told his wives, we're not doing this, we're following God.
Right.
We're not going to be doing all this other
Yeah.
idol worship. Regan?
Well, yeah, just what Sandra said, and it's interesting how like obvious their like deviation from like the right path is,
Yeah,
because it's not in Jerusalem, it's not even in one other place, it's in two other places, like Dan and Bethel.
not
It-
using the Levites, no.
Yeah, and not using the Levites, it's on a different day entirely. And like the golden calves kind of reminds you of Exodus when they do this like 40 days after.
I think it all
After the
goes back to
Exodus.
that first passage that he had read about how we'd all wanted a king, and now they all have someone in charge, and it doesn't matter whether he's telling you right or wrong, we just wanted somebody to tell us what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's personal responsibility that comes with freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you all think? Do you feel like you could go into another passage in the Old Testament, go through your own study, reading it, diving in a little bit deeper than just normal reading, and try and get some more things out of whatever you're reading? Okay.
I feel like the breakdown in itself is a little bit easier to understand, but the actual black and white information is still just a lot.
Yeah.
I know, sometimes I feel like when I've ever read it, if I have, it's kind of, I'm just reading words. It is just like you said, kind of black and white. It's so much to kind of break down.
Yeah.
And like you say, if you don't go back and forth from a map, I kind of just like, whatever, I just saw 10 cities in that whole verse, and it's like, I have no idea where anything is in location with what, so it kind of just doesn't make sense. So yeah, I do believe you need to take the time to break down.
Yeah. So if like you study like American history, like something happens in Philadelphia, like, oh.
What relevance does it have in Seattle? You know?
Well, but it's even a little bit easier because it's like, oh, I know where Philadelphia is, like I know who George Washington is, like
Yeah, well,
and so
that's
when you
kind of what I
go,
joke with the Seattle part, because what relevance does it have?
Yeah,
Like, if I didn't
yeah.
realize that Seattle was on the other coast, I'd probably have thought that what happened in Philly might have a direct effect to
Yeah.
Seattle if I thought it was a neighboring city.
yeah, and so like when we like look at the Bible stories, it's like even further removed.
Yeah.
It's like okay, so it is
Right.
more like more data, like because Dan could be Philadelphia and
Yeah.
Jerusalem could be Seattle, and I really know.
Data. I feel like that was a good way to explain it, data.
Yeah. And so it's so important. Yeah, just take it slowly. And I think Judges, Joshua, and First and Second Kings, like that's all like there's a little bit of overlap, but that's kind of chronological. So that would help you at least like line up the data a little bit as far as what's happening in Israel.
Especially given, with very few exceptions, just about all these cities don't exist anymore and haven't for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, so my encouragement for you, first of all, if you are just not reading the Bible at all, I would start with the New Testament. Start there, start the Gospels. It's a little bit easier to dive in and figure out what's going on. But then after you get, once you get a good understanding of that, dive into the Old Testament, because it'll help you have a deeper, richer understanding of what's going on in the New Testament. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there. We've just read a few passages, but there's some really impactful things that can really help you grow spiritually. So that would be my suggestion. Like I said, start with the New Testament and then just start at Genesis and read through. Because we kind of jumped in the middle of 1 Kings, but even if you start at the beginning of 1 Kings chapter 1 and read through, what we just talked about tonight will make a lot more sense because you're getting the story from the beginning and not just jumping in the middle. Okay, that being said, I don't want to keep us too much longer. Let me just pray and we will end it. God, I just thank you for tonight. I just ask that you would help us to have a deeper revelation of your heart, of your word. I pray that as we go from here, as we read, as we study your word, that you would speak to us, that you would reveal yourself to us through whatever we're reading, that you would supernaturally help us to understand what you want to speak to us through the Bible, and that we would ultimately grow closer to you. And I just pray that as we go from here, that you would just watch over us, keep us safe, and help us to be salt and light to the people that we come in contact with. I just thank you for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.